Today's video is brought to you by Squarespace. So this is the spot where I did my first ever solo wild camp in a tent. Why wouldn't anyone want to pitch a tent somewhere like this? But my first camp wasn't all that straightforward. In fact, I put it off quite a few times. I had the same anxieties and fears that a lot of people have. Things like, where do you safely park your car? How do I know if I'm not going to be moved on? How do I know if my gear's going to work? So in this video I'm going to talk about some of the steps that I put in place to try and ensure that my first wild camp went smoothly. So obviously before I went camping I'd done as much research as I could. I've binge watched all the YouTube videos that were out there, and I'd seen some locations like this one here on Bamford Edge that were pretty close to home. So it's about 20 minutes to half an hour's drive for me. I dug the maps out, made sure that where I wanted to camp was open access land. That doesn't mean that you've got the right to camp there, but you are allowed to wander away from the footpaths and explore a little more. So if you can, you're better off exploring the area and just a day out, just for a hike like I am today, and see if there are any potential camping spots. So I'd walked up here 3 or 4 times before I camped here. So this was the actual spot where I pitched my tent for the first time. It's a little bit back from the edge. Still get some stunning views though. But also, while walking up, I was always scouting around for other places to pitch. Because if when you got up here, somebody was pitched in your spot, or you needed somewhere with a little bit more protection from the wind, it makes really good sense to have a backup plan. Somewhere like this. So down there's a lovely little flat spot. Doesn't quite have the view that I want over Ladybower, but it's a great bit of shelter from the wind. And if you can't find your ideal spot further along, this is always a good idea to have a backup plan. This is a beautiful spot to camp, and it's a relatively easy walk up. But parking the car was one of the big worries that I had. I'm always fearful of leaving my car in laybys in the middle of nowhere. So today I'm parked in a lay-by just over there. So ideally, this is the best place to park my car. Bamford's Edge is just up there, but I'm not a big fan of leaving my car in lonely laybys. You never know who might come and park up behind in the middle of the night, put your windows through, steal your stereo. I'd much rather walk a little bit further and park in one of the villages close by. Somewhere like this. Parking your car in a built-up area as opposed to a lonely lay-by means it's less likely to be broken into or vandalised. It's much easier to find places to camp if you go and explore yourself. However, if it's somewhere a little further afield, you can use the Google Maps Street View to find possible places to pitch your tent, and definitely to find places to park your car. It's a really handy tool. Again, I'll link a video in the description below. So I found a place to pitch and a place to park. Got on OS Maps, plotted my route. Says an hour to get up. It's only 1.5 miles. So if anything went wrong and I did have to bail for any reason, it's not too far to get back to my car. So another concern that I had was, is my gear going to be up to the job? I know it might sound obvious, but there was a few things that I did before I brought my gear out on a wild camp. But before we talk about gear, a quick thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video. So if you don't know who Squarespace are, they're the #1 place to go if you want to have a go at building a website by yourself. It was really easy to do. All we had to do was choose one of their ready-made templates. You can upload your own photos, change some of the text, and then just drag things around a little bit till you get that unique website just of your own. We use Squarespace pretty much every day for tracking our orders, checking on the analytics. This can be done on desktop or using the mobile app. It's also played a massive part in promoting the YouTube channel. We also use the platform to sell merchandise, and there's loads of features with that, including email notifications for when items are back in stock. So if you want to have a go at building a website of your own, click the link in the description below or head over to squarespace.com/Paul Messner. You'll get a totally free trial and 10% off your first purchase. So the last thing you want on a wild camp is to find out that your gear is not up to the job. So what I did was tested it beforehand. So So that might have been on day hikes, like today. I'm out testing a bit of gear. But also, I tested the full setup. So I chose to go to a couple of campsites in places like Edale, which is this sort of environment, but it's a controlled environment. So if there was any problems, I could quite easily get something extra from my car, or even go home if something failed on me. So this is the first outing for my new Vesus windshield and ever new pot combo. I've been after something to replace the storming Norman cone, which unfortunately you can't get anymore. This is a windshield and pot support in one. So very excited to use this. So making sure that my gear was going to work in the conditions I was going to be camping in, was very important. Paid particular attention to sleeping bag and sleeping pad ratings. Always go for the comfort rating and not the limit or the extreme, or you might end up very cold. So while I've got the stove on the go, I need to talk about food. It's not like you can order a Deliveroo to somewhere like this, so you need to make sure you got something to eat. So I went for something like that, which was a boil in the bag kind of meal. That's what I'm going to have for my lunch today. Took a little bit more food than I needed, plenty of snacks as well. Something that's quite energy dense, something like peanut M&Ms or trail mix if you want the healthier version. Also, when it comes to testing your gear, get familiar with your tent. Make sure that you can pitch it in a variety of different conditions. The very least you want to do is, with any new gear, is to unpack it, get it set up to make sure that it all works properly. So practicing using all your gear on a campsite, it's an ideal place to do your apprenticeship when it comes to camping, really. Also, for my first wild camp, it was late summertime, so I knew that the weather wasn't going to be too bad. The last thing you want is to find out in -6 in the middle of winter that your gear's not up to the job. You could be in a whole lot of trouble. It's much easier learning your trade and getting into it in nicer weather conditions. So I think that's a grouse. So if you've walked past a grouse and you've heard the noise it makes, it's one of the most frightening things you'll hear. You jump out of your skin. Wildlife was one of the things that concerned me a little bit. Rodents chewing through your gear, adders, petrified of snakes. And there are certain parts of the Peak District where adders like to bask in the sunshine, especially on these sort of rocky edges. Kerber, for example. Dinner won't be long. But to be honest with you, I've never seen an adder in all the years I've been coming up to the Peak District, Lake District, and they're actually much more scared of you than you are of them. Very good. These are actually tastier than the dehydrated meals, but they're bulkier because they've already got the water in them. You get proper chunks of vegetables and stuff. So although you've got to be wary of wildlife and watch where you're stepping, things like that, your biggest predator is likely to be midges. When the weather's quite still and there's no breeze around, you do get quite a lot of midges sometimes, and they can be really uncomfortable, biting on your face and things like that. So I got a midge spray, I got a midge head net, and that made sure that I was okay and protected from all of those kind of things. Ticks are another thing that I was always wary of, so you need to be careful in certain areas because ticks can spread Lyme's disease. But I always make sure I check myself, check my tent, things like that, and take a tick key with you, tick remover, just in case you ever get one on you. You might still hear Noises in the night though, a fox screeching. I always take earplugs with me now, and that makes sure that, you know, that a lot of the noises are eliminated. So places like this, legally, you're not supposed to be wild camping on. And there's always the fear, and I had the fear of being asked to move on. There are one or two things that you can do. What I did, I camped midweek, so there's less likely to be people around. On a weekend, this sort of area can be quite busy, and although I've camped here 4 or 5 times now, even camped and bivvied on this little spot here, as well as putting my Acto on it, I wouldn't camp here anymore, purely because it is that popular now that some of the gamekeepers from the landowners, so all of this moorland here is full of grouse, and they do a lot of shooting up this neck of the woods, and they don't really want you on their land. So there have been cases, especially on weekends, where the gamekeepers are moving people along, asking them to leave. So now I would find somewhere a little further away, something that is not quite as easy to access by a gamekeeper on his quad bike. Maybe something over yonder, Bleaklow way, up on Derwent Edge. They're a little bit more remote, but you're not going to be bothered by anybody asking you to move on. So there's also the safety element to think about. You know, when you're climbing on these rocks, if you're not careful, you might have a little slip, trip or fall. You might break your ankle, break a leg. So you need to have plans in place if there's an accident. Nowadays I carry a satellite communicator with an SOS feature, but back then I didn't have one of those. So what I did back then was I told people where I was going. I shared the route that I was taking and where I was going to be camping with family members. And I told them what time I would be coming home, so if I hadn't checked in that time, you know, they could call for help and maybe send out the search parties for me. So you do tend to worry about things that aren't going to happen. So I always take a first aid kit, but I never plan on using it. Repair kits for sleeping pads, tents, pole sleeves in case one of the pole snaps on your tent, and spare guy lines, things like that. So I take them just for that peace of mind, but I never use them. So the biggest single thing that helped me prepare for wild camping was doing it on a campsite. So there's loads of campsites in places like the Peak District and the Lake District. There's hardly anything out there that you're not going to experience on a campsite. All you really need to know is that your gear is going to work. You're not going to get lost. You're not going to be freezing to death. So testing on a campsite first means that you feel really confident coming somewhere like this. And it takes away so much of that anxiety, so you can just go out and enjoy it and soak it up. Anyway, that's it for this one. If you've got any hints and tips that you want to share with people in the comments, leave them down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.